Hi everyone, my name is Suhavi and thank you so much for joining me today at Elastic's Community Conference. Before I start, I just want to give a quick shout out to the organizers for giving me an opportunity to speak today. With that said, today I'll be talking about how I used blockchain, Elasticsearch, and QR codes to build something kind of cool. Back in last year, Thanksgiving, I wrote an article about technologies that I was grateful for. And I wrote about 26 technologies starting from letter A all the way to Z. And some of these I had used before, and some of them I had planned to use in the future. So when I was looking for my next project to work on, I thought of going back to that list and picking three at random to sort of build something with. As you can probably guess, I ended up choosing Elasticsearch and QR codes as well as blockchain. So that's kind of the backstory on how I got here. And a little bit about myself. I'm a software engineer who loves building cool things, and I'm always, trying to learn new technologies. So with that said, in today's talk, I'll be kind of going through my process of developing a decentralized application and how I was able to incorporate QR codes into that. And then I'll be talking a little bit about how I leveraged Elasticsearch in order to observe transaction data that was being made on the blockchain, as well as syncing the data from the blockchain to Elasticsearch in real time. And then I'll be going over a demo where we kind of get to see all of the moving parts of the application, as well as the dashboard on Elasticsearch. If you have any questions at any point, feel free to throw them in the chat. I'll be answering them. Or you can also contact me directly through LinkedIn or Twitter. All right. So a lot of the times when you have when you're building something, you start out with an idea or a problem that you want to solve. And then after you have that, you kind of look for technologies or a stack that suits your needs and based on what you're trying to build. I kind of started backwards, where I had a stack that I wanted to use. I had a set of tools, but I had absolutely no idea what I wanted to make. So in that situation, I tried to see what problem each technology aims to solve and what they're good at. So blockchains are good at storing state and saving history. And when I thought about that, I immediately went to the supply chain industry. Because we obviously want to be able to track our shipments and see their sort of journey to a distribution center, and you want to be transparent about that data, as well as make sure that it can't be modified. So it has to be reliable as well. So I thought that the supply chain market was a potential for what I could work with. But I kind of wanted to take it a step further. Obviously there are applications out there making use of a distributed ledger that are for the supply chain. And I kind of wanted to add myself as a consumer into that picture. So not only like a item being, manufactured or produced and then making its way to a distribution center, I also want to see its journey when it's in my hands, especially when it comes to things like farmed goods, local produce. You want to be able to track if it's actually locally produced or not, as well as when it was, if it's like produce, when it was grown, when it was farmed, that type of thing. So that was my idea, and I already had a stack. So the next step is building that decentralized application. And here I'll go over the 4 important tools that you need in order to build a decentralized application. So the first thing you need is a language that lets you write your smart contract. A smart contract it's kind of like a binding agreement that outlines what kind of transactions you're going to be making on your blockchain. And for that, I use Solidity. So Solidity is a very straightforward language with a similar syntax to C++, where you outline the methods as well as any structs you're using in your blockchain. So after you've written that out, the second step is to compile and migrate that contract. And for that, I used a tool called Truffle, which allows you to compile and migrate as well as a few other things with your contracts. It basically packages it into a format that's easily ingestible by Ethereum clients. So the thing about migrating contracts is that it's similar to databases in that you kind of need to migrate your database, and you can add migrations on top to kind of figure out what you want to store. But blockchain is a little bit different in that regard. If you migrate your contract, all the data and all the transactions that were made before it become nullified, since they don't abide by your original contract. So you need to basically flush out that data. And because of that, you kind of want to have a local blockchain client running. And for that, I went with a tool called Ganache. There's also Test RPC, which is fairly popular. And basically, once you have your written out contract, you compile, migrate it, you can finally deploy it. So I used Ganache for that. And basically, it's a Ethereum client that runs locally, which means you don't need to spend money on Ethereum gas if you're compiling multiple times. And basically, it's a place for you to have your contract and see any transactions being made on it, as well as blocks that are mined. So we'll take a look at it later on in the demo. But the fourth component is Web3, which is what actually allows you to make those transactions. So once you have your contract deployed, obviously you want to be able to access the methods as well as see what's already on the blockchain, right? So Web3 is great for making those transactions, and they have a very vast API that you can use. If you're using it if you're building a dApp that's running on React Native, another alternative is Drizzle, which I also used, since there's no Web3 wrapper that I'm aware of for React Native. So those are really all the tools you need to build a dApp. And to me, the best part was that it was completely free. Going into this, I thought I would have to, invest some money since it uses Ethereum, and that wasn't the case at all. So these are all the 4 things I needed, and they were available to me right away. So moving on to the smart contract, I kind of want to dive deeper into the actual contents of the contract. And I decided to store 2 things. So the first is an item, and I decided to go with the most basic properties. It has an ID, it has a name, the number of times that item has been tracked. So the journey it's taken from when it was first registered to wherever it is now. And it also has an address of the creator, so the person that registered that item. And it also has a mapping of states, which is kind of like an array of states of that item. So where it started off, and then what happened to it after, and then after that. And a state, it just has 3 components. So it has a date, it has a location, and the person who added that state. So with all of that being available to me in my contract, I decided to throw in QR codes by allowing users to add items onto the blockchain, register them, and having the application generate a QR code that can, be printed and you can stick it on, if I'm someone that is registering an item, I would get a QR code that I can then put on that item. And then every subsequent time someone scans that QR code, a state is added to the blockchain. And I kind of have a quick visual on the end-to-end call flow. So you would, given an item that is registered, you would scan it, and then a state would be added to the blockchain. And that state would, it would relate to the item that it belongs to. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to talk about is observability using Elasticsearch. So in order to get my Elastic instance up and running, I did make use of Docker Compose, and I would highly, highly recommend it for anyone getting started with Elastic's products. Since it makes it super easy, you just take your Docker Compose file and then you can build it using that. So it was a very simple process, and before I knew it, I was already on the platform and adding dashboards into Kibana. Okay. Now for the challenging part, which was syncing my blockchain with Elasticsearch. And when you have to sync a blockchain, you have one of two things that can happen. So either you already have your blockchain that's been running, it has a few transactions on it already, and you're adding Elasticsearch into the mix. And the second scenario is if you start up both at the same time. So you have your blockchain started and then you have Elastic started. And basically you're making sure that your Elastic instance is synced up with your blockchain at all times, making it, a real-time mechanism. So there's 3 steps that I took to make this possible. The first step is to establish a connection to Elastic and a connection to Ganache using Node.js. So I created a Node.js server that was able to communicate and see what was going on Elastic, as well as see what was going on my Ethereum client, which is Ganache. And then once I have that set up, number 2 is continuously polling the blockchain for new blocks. So what the server does is it checks for any new blocks that are added on the blockchain, and then it looks inside of them, which is step 3. It looks inside of those blocks to see if they contain a transaction. And a transaction is basically if you have an item that gets registered or a state that gets added. So once it finds a block containing a transaction, that transaction is indexed. So that means that Elastic will now be in sync with the blockchain. Whatever state was added, whatever item was registered, it'll be visible on Elastic. Okay, so I'm gonna go over a little bit of the code. It's kind of pseudocode. So this is how I was able to pull the blockchain basically. So I made my start block equal to 0, and then I made the last block equal to get latest block, which is a API method provided by Web3. And then I set my current to start block. Then I have a while loop that runs for as long as current is less than the latest block. What it does is it'll process the block that it's currently on, see if there's any transactions inside of it, any data that we can extract, and then it moves on to the next block. But while it's doing this, the last block is also getting updated. So the more blocks that the blockchain has, that's how long it'll run, and then the current block kind of tries to get closer to that. So that's how it's able to run in real time. So pretty straightforward mechanism, and that's just kind of how it works. So now I'm going to move on to the demo and kind of show you how it's working in real time. You'll get to see the terminal where I have my Ethereum client running, as well as the Elastic dashboard. So let me just hop into my demo environment. All right, so here's my demo environment. I have 4 things running here at the moment. I know it looks a little bit intimidating at first glance, but it's not as bad as it looks. So let's start on the right side. Over here, I have Elasticsearch running. And as I mentioned earlier, it is built using Docker Compose. So the process of spinning it up and running it was honestly as simple as it could be. So I have 3 Elasticsearch instances, and there's also one Kibana instance running in here. And they're all available. You can access them on the allocated port, I think 5601. So that's about all that's happening. Anytime something gets indexed, it will most likely show up on this screen over here. Moving on to the phone screen, I am currently mirroring my phone, which has my decentralized application installed on it. So it's called Digital Orange, and we'll kind of be running through the demo on here. And the app is built using React Native, and it also uses a lot of libraries used to communicate and write to the blockchain, as well as do things like generate QR codes as well as scanning QR codes. And then let's move on to the bottom left. Over here is my Ethereum client, one of the tools I mentioned earlier. It's called Ganache, and it's currently running my blockchain locally. So if there's a transaction, it will show up right over here. And right now, you're just going to see a lot of get block by number and block by number calls. And that's primarily because of the server running on the top left over here. So what it's doing is consistently polling the blockchain in order to stay in sync. So as you can see, it's been running for a while. We're analyzing block 14,000 over here. And every time it analyzes a block, it checks if there's any transactions inside of it, which means is anything actually being written to the blockchain, or is an item being registered, is an item state being added. So right now, obviously, it's not seeing any changes, so it's skipping all of them. But once we kind of get into the demo, and we'll see some changes. Okay, so let me start this up. And right when you open it, you see a login screen. So the authentication was done using Firebase. So that's another component of the application I forgot to mention. And I'm just going to go into the middle icon over here. This is where you can register new items. So all it takes is the name of the item for now. So I'm just going to go ahead and register maybe apples. Okay, so I'm going to add that, and once I hit add, you'll see that a QR code gets generated for us, and we also see that a transaction was made on the blockchain. So you can see the transaction hash, the amount of gas, the transaction used, and the block number. So that block number was analyzed as well on the server that's trying to keep our Elasticsearch instance in sync. So it did find one transaction and it tried to index it. So over here we got an error because to index it to Elastic, we actually need the item to have at least 2 states. Right now it got added and it has only 1 state, so the location it was registered. Ideally, we want to have 2 or more states so that we can create a geo shape, which is kind of cool. So you need at least 2 or more points so that you can connect them and kind of create a vector path. So I'm going to go ahead and scan an item. So over here, if you go to this icon, you see a camera that lets you scan some QR codes. So I do have one right now that I'm just going to lift up my phone, and okay, that was pretty quick. So the item got updated, so I'm just going to go view it. So it takes a bit. As you can see, the transaction was made over here, and it was also indexed in Elastic. So let me just show this little timeline over here. And right now it just shows you the timestamps as well as the longitude and latitude of whatever, wherever that item was. And obviously I spoofed my location. There's no way I went to, I'm pretty sure one of these is like Antarctica. So spoof my location, and here you can kind of, I'm showing the journey of that product. So if there was a box of oranges, so you could see, okay, on February 19th it was here, and then it ended up going here. So it sort of gives you a visibility, and anyone who scans that QR code, you can see where that item's been and where it is now. So as you can see, also, let me scroll back up. The item was indexed in Elastic. So we have, more than 2 points clearly over here, and we'll see it on the dashboard that I've built. Let me switch over to it right now. Okay. So here is the dashboard that I kind of built, and this is where you see those longitude and latitude coordinates actually show up on a map, and you can visualize where something has been. So each distinct color sort of shows the journey of that one item. Again, all these are, this is all fake data. Obviously, nothing started out in Brazil and then went to the US and then decided to go, wherever this is. So that's kind of the big picture, where you can see and visualize where everything is going, where things are traveling. And then on the side here, I have a few more visualizations. I have a word cloud that just sort of has the items that have been indexed onto Elastic. And then over here we have the most active accounts. So I have been given 10 accounts. When you run your local blockchain, you'll get 10 addresses that you can use to make transactions. So I thought that's another cool thing. And in general, I think the possibilities of what you can add here are endless, and working with these 3 technologies and, being able to build this has been a really rewarding experience, and I got to learn so much. I hope that if anyone is looking into, either using blockchain or Elasticsearch for the very first time, I hope there's some things that you can learn from me. Because it was my first time working with either of these technologies, and it was intimidating at first, but it kind of helps to see how much documentation there is out there. So that's it. That's all I had for the demo, and now I'm just going to hop back into my slide deck. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that little demo, and maybe you were able to learn something new from it. These are the resources that I will be sharing that I find particularly useful. Well, the first one is my repository with the application as well as the server to sync up your blockchain to Elastic with. The rest are some tools that really helped me along the way. The first is Truffle Suite, which helped me get my React Native application up and running. And the second is a project called Ether to Elasticsearch, which I took a lot of inspiration and code snippets from in order to sync up my blockchain with Elastic. That being said, thank you so much for listening to me talk about something I think is very cool. And if you want to connect, you can find me on LinkedIn, GitHub, or Twitter. And yeah, thank you so much again, and enjoy the rest of the conference.